I'm going to pound this just because we do this. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. We have a very special guest here who will be talking about three things. He will be talking about his experience as an FBI agent, doing the one and only undercover operation in the United States that actually netted the arrest of a Yakuza boss. If there's anyone from the Kyoku Tokai here today, you're not really welcome, but you can be here. He'll also be then talking about casino security in general. Obviously, casino security in Japan will differ from what is in the United States, since Japan has actual gun control laws. And then he will be talking in general about security and his own experiences. Hopefully we'll have 30 minutes for questions. Let me do a quick introduction here. Actually, I've known Jim for about 17 years. He is a retired FBI special agent. He was born in Asakusa, Shitamachi, along with Takeshi, not next to him, but that same area. His mother is Japanese. His father is American. He is also Jewish-Japanese, which makes him quite a minority. After graduating from university, or before graduating from the university, I get this sometimes wrong, he was in the Army. He then joined the FBI. He was stationed in several places. He was also the originator of the working group with the National Police Agency, which has brought the FBI and the National Police Agency into a working relationship over the years. And during his time in Hawaii, he was in charge of the Asian Organized Crime Task Force. And while doing that, because there was no one else who could do it, he also went undercover in an operation called Operation Tropical Storm. It is a notable operation, and if you wanted to know more about it, you can look on Amazon.com and read Operation Tropical Storm, which is 20 pages, or you can find a series called Deep Undercover, Operation Tropical Storm, and watch the exciting recreation video, where you can see a Japanese woman pull meth out of her panties. It's kind of exciting. But we're going to have Jim talk a little bit about that operation and what it's like to deal with the Yakuza on an undercover level. Then he will be talking about the major points of dealing with security, because as we know, as Japan is introducing casinos, there is some doubt that they are really prepared to deal with organized crime infiltration. And if you remember that Yakuza is actually a word for a losing hand in gambling, that most Yakuza actually were gamblers, you can be sure that they are going to want to get a piece of the casino action here and may be moderately successful. So without any further ado, Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to express my sincerest appreciation to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan for inviting me to speak today. It's my real honor to be here to address some very important topics. Jake, thanks for the introduction. We have been friends for a long time. I was born in Japan. My mom's Japanese. I was born 1957 in Asakusa. My mom married an American GI. We ended up moving to Los Angeles when I was a child. After high school, I went in the U.S. Army. I was with the NATO forces at the time. It was right after the Vietnam War. When I service tour ended, I ended up graduating from the University of Southern California. When you grow up in Los Angeles, at least in San Pedro where I grew up, typically you become a fireman or a police officer or a longshoreman. And I wanted to be something different than that. So I applied to the FBI. Nobody where I grew up was an FBI agent. That was something that was a TV, unattainable type of background. I applied, I scored relatively well, and 7 years after high school, I was at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Very fortunate. My first assignment, I was on the bank robbery squad in New Orleans, worked general criminal matters. And as I progressed into my tenure in the FBI, they transitioned me into Asian organized crime. Now, Asian organized crime in the 80s was basically a lot of heroin traffickers and gangsters and Chinatowns, et cetera. I was promoted after 10 years. I ended up organizing the FBI's initiative to get close to the Japanese, the Keisatsucho, National Police Agency Japan. So we started a working group under former FBI Director William Webster. And we wanted to formulate it after the Italian-American group that we had that was very fruitful in terms of cross-training, sharing of intelligence, et cetera. So we initiated that. I was on the forefront of that. That led to meetings annually with the National Police Agency, which is a phenomenal department. They're terrific. They're experts in a lot of different things. And it was a pleasure as an FBI agent to work with the NPA and others. I actually was assigned, for those of you who are familiar with the Kasumigaseki area, before NPA headquarters is what it is today. It was in the old Jinjinbiru. Does anybody remember that? Yeah, and that's where the NPA headquarters was. I did a tour there. I was promoted to a supervisor in Honolulu. And at that time, in early 1990s Honolulu, there was an epidemic of crystal methamphetamine coming from Asia. Now, the drug of choice on the U.S. mainland at the time was crack. The drug of choice in the Hawaiian Islands was crystal meth. The difference between the two is crystal meth is a lot more expensive. So in the FBI, we started seeing a spike in bank robberies, things like that, because you can't rob a 7-Eleven to get enough money to buy crystal meth. You have to rob a bank. So we decided to figure out how was this crystal meth coming into the Hawaiian Islands? Who was doing this? A lot of it was some singular criminals, targets of opportunity, et cetera, but we also noticed that the Boryokudan was doing that as well. So we launched an undercover operation called Tropical Storm. And because of the relationships that we developed with the NPA, we were able to bring a couple of NPA officers to assist us when we initiated electronic surveillance. Very extraordinary techniques in the FBI. You need a court order, et cetera. Excuse me. So while we were wiretapping phones of potential Boryokudan members and associates, we came across a group that was bringing in crystal meth into the Hawaiian Islands. We needed an undercover agent to go undercover with the Yakuza. In order to do that, you have to have some level of Japanese language and background. Well, I was one of one at the time, so I was the FBI supervisor. I put together the undercover operation. I was the undercover agent, so I was kind of a one-man band. It resulted in the first ever arrest and conviction of a Yakuza boss in U.S. law enforcement history in the United States. It's also on deep undercover, as Jake alluded to. You can see it's kind of a forensic file format where I'm on camera speaking, and there's an actor that plays me. So it's a little bit too Hollywoodish for me, but it does give you the soup to nuts version.
Or you can read the long 20-page version, Operation Tropical Storm, whatever you feel like.
After that, I was promoted again to the chief of the Asian unit, criminal enterprise unit. And then, of course, 9/11 hit, and I was transitioned. I was a polygraph interrogator during 9/11, and we all kind of worked terrorism for that very trying period of 9/11 and thereafter. I transitioned back into Asia organized crime, back at FBI headquarters. I was able to put some nice initiatives together as Asian organized crime was transitioning into not just the drug trafficking stuff of the 90s, it was getting into white collar, et cetera. So at that point, after 25 years in the FBI, I was offered an opportunity to go in the private sector. Well, the only two jobs I had in my life at the time, the U.S. Army, FBI, I didn't know anything about the private sector. Steve Wynn, who's no longer with Wynn Resorts, called and asked if I would be his chief of security, and I was flattered to get that type of call. I was 49 years old. I had 25 years as an agent. I was able to retire. I took the offer. I was there for 12 years. I can tell you right now, when I first started at Wynn Resorts in 2007, there were 2 casinos that Wynn had. We had one in Las Vegas and one in Macau, and now they have 6. And the casino security in the States has changed. And it's not a perfect analogy from the States to Japan. In the US right now, as everybody knows, there's a catastrophic shooting of some sort continuously, and a casino in the States is a soft target. And as everybody, again, knows, there were shootings in schools and workplaces. It's a very sad time in America, and it's very dangerous. And of course, we had the biggest shooting ever on October 1st, 2017 at the Mandalay Bay. So it's something that casino security from a physical security standpoint has had to adjust. At Wynn, when I was there, I started a program where our entrances and exits were covered by U.S. Marine Embassy security guards. This is what casino security has come down to. Typically, security officers are not that well paid. They don't have significant law enforcement or background. So we brought in Marines. If you're going to bring in a Marine to guard your entrance, you're going to have to pay him. So we upped the pay, and we did a lot of nice things, enhanced our K-9, et cetera. That's the physical security part. The internal parts that is more analogous to the integrated resort issues here that are one day going to be in Japan are compliance, anti-money laundering policies, oversight, thorough backgrounding of key employees, maintenance backgrounding of key employees who are transitioned into key positions like finance, credit, et cetera. All those things are done. When I say background, it's not just a Google check. You have to do a thorough background on everybody in a gaming establishment who's in a position of trust or authority. Luckily, my FBI background, I can do those types of things. And you have to be thorough, pay attention to detail, be all-encompassing. You can't just do a local check. If somebody's lived overseas, they've got family members, there's any ancillary issues, you have to check all that stuff. So backgrounds can take a while. This is one of the things I'm trying to convey is when you're bringing in employees or contractors or subcontractors, there's always that chance that a nefarious element is going to come in. And thorough background procedures are the key. That's domino one in hiring, et cetera. There's a lot of other factors involved in keeping out bad elements, whether it's the Bodhiokudan or associates or whatever. You have to make sure that there's an independence to compliance. You can't have a bunch of internal employees who are sitting around a table agreeing robotically on things that are in place that perhaps they put in. You need outsiders to contribute, to challenge, to look at new ideas, because compliance is never ending. It's heavily regulated in Nevada. Gaming's been there for about 88 years. I think the first casino was 1931. Of course, in Macau, it's been there 150 plus years. So there's a long history of gaming regulation, suspicious transaction reports that need to be filed. The regulatory agencies are always very in tune to what's going on, et cetera. Surveillance, security in a U.S. casino, there's a bifurcation. There's surveillance for gaming, and there's surveillance for everything else. And you need that command and control structure that are separate. You can't have people watching games who are also watching the elevators. You need to make sure that there are two different departments. Just one thing that needs to be done eventually when they have an IR here. There's a lot of things here that I can talk about. I want to field some questions as well. More than happy. I don't work at the Wynn anymore. I did 12 years. I call myself a free agent. I opened up a business, a consulting business with another FBI agent who actually had my job before me. He went to MGM, and now we're both kind of on our own. So look forward to opening it up. I'll answer any questions that you ask, and I look forward to really good, substantive, and pointed questions.
Well, but before I open this the questions, I had one question from the floor, so to speak. You've had almost 30 years dealing with Japanese organized crime. And the perception of some people seems to be that, and you've been to their offices, right? You have been to, I think, the offices of the Yakuza boss that you arrested. The perception seems to be, for many people who are thinking of opening casinos here, that you just look for guys with tattoos and missing fingers, and that you should be able to keep them out of the business that way. What is the challenge of making sure that organized crime, Japanese organized crime, doesn't infiltrate the casino business here?
So that's a great question, Jay. In my opinion, the more alarming group that really needs to be looked at, not so much the Bodhiokudan members, but the Bodhiokudan associates. Those are the ones that are not easily and readily identifiable. They're the ones that provide support. Now, the Japanese government around 2017 enacted some new anti-Boryokudan laws, which was great. The only downside that I'm aware of is that a lot of this stuff went underground. 20 years ago, you could pass by the Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters in Kobe or wherever. There was a sign. You knew that was the building. They handed out business cards. Not anymore. But the associates who help facilitate the criminal activity, restaurants, et cetera, those are the ones that are, to me, alarming, that are not as identifiable as an outright member who is identifiable, perhaps is in a law enforcement database. Those are the ones that need to be extra vetted to make sure that that element doesn't sneak in through the back door.
Okay. Questions?
Good morning, Mr. Stern. My name is Richard Susilo from Indonesia. You said at the end of your speech you are not working now after the Wynn resort April 6 no longer require for your services on that time. And you are also said that you are working with other FBI agent right now for consultation, whatever. So what I would like to know is, because I read from the Google about the case, the Wynn Resort case between Steve and Elaine, and then goes to the Kazuo Okada. Do you think, and then the Kazuo Okada also now very active on YouTuber, as a YouTuber, and also Twitter, whatever, and to give 100 million yen to support him, what blah, 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 blah. Actually, I would like to know, do you believe that this Okada-san is very close, tightly with the Yamaguchi-gumi or other Borokudan? Thank you very much.
So that's a great question. About 2012, a former board member of Wynn Resorts named Okada was removed from the board for what we believe to be illegal behavior. And litigation ensued, which that was our legal department. I got involved in the aspect that I believe there was a crime that had occurred at that time. I referred it to the FBI, and the FBI opened up a criminal investigation on Okada and his alleged criminal activity. Now, being a former FBI agent, the FBI is not going to open up a criminal investigation on somebody because Jim Stern has a retired FBI badge in his back pocket. They're going to do it based on the merits of the predication and information. They opened up a criminal investigation at that point, and I stepped back. They did their investigation for several years. I think he has ties to bad people. It's my personal opinion. The FBI would know better, the active FBI, not the retired FBI. And the Wynn Resorts did the right thing by removing him. And I think history will show that he also did some bad things to his own company.
For those of you who are not aware, Kazuo Okada was the president of what was called Universal Entertainment and also Aruze, which was very big in the gaming industry here and in pachinko business. He is a very litigious person. He sued Reuters for $2 million in the United States and in Japan for things that they have written about him. So we will probably tread lightly when discussing Mr. Okada. Working press first, if we have any questions from the working press. That's just the general rule.
Michael Penn of the Shingetsu News Agency and AGB Nippon. I interviewed you last year by telephone, you may remember.
I do remember. Thank you.
Yeah, basically I wanted to follow up on what Richard was mentioning there at the beginning. We really haven't heard the story of what happened at the end of your Wynn tenure a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. You know, you were being promoted pretty heavily to me personally by Mr. Gordon as being a really big asset for Wynn in their bid here in Japan, you know, and then suddenly you're out. And I was wondering, well, what happened there? And also, tell us a little bit more details about your new organization. It sounds like you're interested in remaining active in the Japanese IR development going forward. What are your plans and your current setup?
Nice talking to you last year, too. So a couple of months ago, and I'm prohibited from talking about this in detail, the company and I decided to mutually separate, and virtually not every, but many executives from Wynn Resorts have left in 2018 through a variety of reasons. But I did separate. I had signed a non-compete, and they wished me well. I wish Wynn Resorts well. It's a good company. And it emanated from the public hearings in Massachusetts on some of the things that went on. And the commission did a very thorough investigation of Wynn Resorts last year. Some people had to leave. So that's about all I can say is it's a very good company, and I wish them all the best. But I look forward to being self-employed now and using my expertise in law enforcement, Boryokudan issues, and gaming, et cetera, to go into a consulting, which we have formed a company, Global Gaming and Resort Security. And that's where we are right now at this point.
Other questions? Could you please identify yourself and the news agency you represent when you come to the microphone?
I'm Miwa Suzuki from Agence France-Presse, AFP. Since the IR law, I've heard a lot of good things about casinos, like depicted as clean entertainment facilities from big operators. But if you look at pachinko parlors or other places, you can see clearly a lot of gambling addicts, and also considering the possibility of bringing Boryokudan or Boryokudan associates on board with these projects. Do you think it's a good idea to bring casinos to Japan, or why would Japan need casinos? Could you give us your thought about that? Thank you.
Well, I'm not a Japanese national. I don't live here, but the potential financial benefits to the Japanese economy are enormous. There are going to be inherent issues with the addiction, Boryokudan, et cetera. There are those issues in China, in the United States. But I think in a society that's very organized, very thorough, and cares about its citizens, like Japan, I think it is personally a good thing for this country. It will be a daunting and very methodical process to get to that end. But if you're asking me, am I in favor of it versus not, I am in favor of it. If you look at the landscape of Macau, I was the FBI attaché in Hong Kong in 1994, and I would go to Macau for law enforcement liaison, and I look at Macau now, it's two different cities. The beneficiaries of the economic piece are just overwhelming, and I think that, now not everything is about money, but I think it's going to create a lot of jobs, a lot of tourism, and done properly is a good thing for this country.
Anyone from the working press? And then I'll open it to associates.
Hi, I'm Christopher Jones from the American Chamber of Commerce and British Chamber of Commerce magazines. So given that you're focusing on consultancy now, and our publications focus on business. What cultural points or considerations would you advise foreign operators coming into the market to take into consideration in terms of security, successful operations, maintaining legal business, and being accepted by the community?
Again, this is a terrific question, because if you look at the cultural situation, Japan to the United States to Singapore to China, they're all different. And gaming potential operators to operate in this country have to understand that they're operating not in China, not in Massachusetts, not in Singapore. Japan is unique in and of itself. If you don't understand the cultural issues, it's not going to be a good start. The gaming piece, obviously, there's a lot of operators that want to operate here, and everybody will tell you that they have the best product. There's more to opening up a casino by using your bona fides and credentials and your past in a different country. That is good for PowerPoints and conversation. You have to understand the totality of what's going to be like to operate in this country, the stipulations, the laws, etc. And once an operator understands all those inherent issues, cultural, etc., they will be the one that will be the best suited to operate in this country.
Any other?
Can I ask here?
Sure, no, I can hear you. So.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question.
Yep. Because we are taping it, and please identify yourself. Sure. It's just a formality.
Sorry about that.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to ask a question. Although, Jake, I read your book, so it was not very entertaining. I've worked previously, my name is Dave Boone, I've worked previously in Macau and in the gaming industry, and I was very curious in terms of, as we all know, the Macau, some of the things that the casinos try to prevent are loan sharking and those types of issues. My question is, what do you think the Japanese government is going to do to, first, try and prevent those similar situations happening in Japan? But secondly, a large part, almost 50% of Macau's gaming revenue is VIP revenue facilitated by junkets. And what do you think, is that going to be a potentially the similar type of revenue segment that the casinos can rely on? And will the Japanese government, Ministry of Finance, accommodate that type of business? Thank you very much.
So a big part of the business in Macau is the so-called junket business. It's VIP. Junket to me is just not reflective of what that part of the business is. It's very heavily regulated in the U.S. casinos, and I'm sure in the other casinos. The VIP rooms are staffed with Wynn employees. Surveillance is Wynn employees. The chips are non-denominational. There are lots of mitigation steps in place to prevent any bad activity. Can you prevent everything? No. But a couple years ago, the U.S.-China Commission, the Congressional Committee, had these very same questions. And we went up and said, the rules and regulations that we have imposed on our junkets are second to none. You can do virtually nothing there with the oversight that we have over those rooms. When you bridge that to a situation here, if they do have that, I don't know if they are or they were not. It's a VIP market is big. That's where big players come in, and let's face it, you're there to make money. It's a money-making situation. As long as it somewhat mirrors the procedures that prevent loan sharking, bad activity, etc., you're going to be okay. It's going to be a lot of work, and you have to make sure that your governance is A1 terrific. But that gets into investigations, ensuring that operators, shareholders, managers, etc., don't have a criminal history. They are required to get police checks in Macau. So there are a lot of ways to ensure that that doesn't get out of hand in Japan. But there's always the potential for some bad activity to happen if you don't have the proper full oversight of that element of the business.
When you say the chips are non-denominational, what does that mean?
That means that when you get chips in a VIP room, you can't walk out with those chips and cash them. You have to go to the cage. They're audited, etc. When you send money in, we check to see where the money came from. You can't leave with a different denomination than you sent in. You can't leave with monies that you sent in that you didn't use. There's a lot of regulatory issues that are in place in those junket rooms.
When people send in money, do you check the person who sends in the money?
Yes.
Other questions? Sir, could you come up to the stand and please state your name?
Hiro Mitsuchi is my name, and Professor Wynn National Fair. As you know, that in mid-1980s, Japanese government decided to put police department as a vice consul in our consul general's office in Honolulu, and that is the first time police was sent abroad for official duty. And what was the purpose? Because of there was an increased number of activity by Yakuza at that time. And what was the activity of Yakuza at that time in Hawaii, or mainly Honolulu, and what their activity right now? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's actually a two-part answer. So police officers assigned overseas in consulates and embassies are in a liaison capacity, the same way that the FBI agents assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo are in the liaison capacity. You're there to act as the representative to the FBI. If, hypothetically, FBI Los Angeles needs to have a lead covered in Japan, numbers checked, interviews, etc., that agent in the embassy will go to the Japanese police, and Japanese police will conduct the investigation. It's the same way. It works both ways. In the United States, the Japanese police officer or keisachito will be a liaison person, and if there is a issue somewhere in Honolulu or Washington, D.C. or wherever, that person is there to liaison with the U.S. hosts to accomplish the lead. Now, the officer assigned to the Japanese consulate in Honolulu, actually, I was there right after. As an example, there was a terrible murder case where he was acting, this was in the early 90s, acting as the point to help facilitate the extradition of a Japanese national who was suspected of committing that crime. So that police officer in that consulate would work with the FBI and at the time Honolulu Police Department to bring back the suspect to Japan to face charges. So the officer has a multitude of roles: liaison, law enforcement assistance, being the point person for Japan law enforcement in a foreign country. It's the same way with the U.S. Representative in Tokyo, whether it be FBI or DEA or Secret Service. They're there as a guest of this country, and they liaison to ensure that investigative matters from the United States are handled in a foreign territory. They call them the legal attachés in the FBI. DEA is called country attaché.
And you said there's a second part to that?
I think that was the question on the Boryokudan. The crimes have changed a lot since the 80s. They've gone, we saw a lot of drug trafficking in the 80s and the 90s with crystal meth. That's what Tropical Storm showed. Now, it's more white-collar crime. There's cyber crime. They still have some of the traditional vices, extortion, etc. But the crime now is transitioned into the times that we live in. Now I've been out of the FBI for about 12 years, but I was the chief of the Asian crime section at the unit at FBI headquarters. And like everything else, crimes get more sophisticated because of technology and whatnot gets more advanced. And that's the same with crime enterprises, etc. So the Yakuza have become a little bit more sophisticated than they were in the, as I refer to it, the Betamax era.
Have you worked with Japanese police officers on a case like Operation Tropical Storm, and how did that work?
Well, again, the FBI NPA working group on organized crime, any matter that came to the FBI's attention vis-a-vis Japan, we would always work through the NPA officers who were assigned to the working group, whether it would be exchange of information, intelligence, etc. So that was the metaphor, the vehicle to enhance the liaison efforts. But you always have to go through the FBI representative in the country. That's what they're there for.
So has there been a time when Japanese police officers have assisted you in your work?
Yeah, during Tropical Storm, we had officers who were assisting with listening to consensually recorded conversations, wiretaps, etc., because they were all in Japanese, and the FBI was just not prepared to translate or interpret the voluminous amounts of information at that time. So Japanese police officers would be able to review transcripts, etc., to help out with that piece. When you're a foreign police officer and you're in the U.S. or an FBI agent in Japan, you don't have any statutory authority to make arrests or execute search warrants or whatever. You're basically you're a diplomat. You're under the auspices of the mission in the country. So you're a liaison person.
Haven't there been cases where Yakuza have been arrested and gotten away with the crime by using the vagueness of the Japanese language as a defense? Or am I misremembering that?
I've never heard using the Japanese language as a defense, unless you're referring to the Takenaka case.
Yes.
That was a DEA case where there was an undercover operation where I think the subjects were trying to exchange a Laws rocket for drugs, and they were arrested. And I believe they were acquitted.
Because they said that hi meant I understand, but not yes.
There was a lost in translation in the jury pool, I think. That was a case also in Honolulu. And I think the defense at that time, I wasn't there in Honolulu, but they brought in linguistics experts to say that, height doesn't necessarily mean yes. Like, let's do the deal. Could mean, height, I hear what you're saying, I understand the question, let's move on. So they were able to confuse the jury, I believe, if that's the case you're referring to, Jake.
Yeah. But not in your case, I guess.
No.
Other questions?
I'm Peter Tuksensky with Momo Matsu and Namba law firm here in Tokyo. I'm an attorney with the firm. Jim, you spoke about the importance of due diligence and background checks on prospective employees for the casinos. What is your understanding of the current state of the whole background check industry? And maybe Jake could also speak on this here.
The state of backgrounds in Japan, was that your question? Yeah. Well, the standards that I've always had in terms of doing a background is not just going through open source information. Backgrounds are also like layering. The more layers you penetrate, the more information you're going to glean and extrapolate. If somebody has traveled overseas, lived overseas, has associates overseas, you need to check those things. You need to check financials, personals, international stuff, travel. That takes a lot of resources. You can't do that sitting at a desk in that manner. So there are good companies, I'm sure, that do nice backgrounds, but it depends who you're backgrounding what you're backgrounding for, and the scope and significance of what you're trying to uncover. And those are all notable questions when you do a background. And a background should not be a singular situation. You have to continually do them if people are moved up into other positions. A background for a valet person is not the same as a background for the manager of the casino cage. Those are two different backgrounds for obvious reasons. So it's, again, like layering.
I was just talking about with this Jim the other day. There are some things in Japan that make doing background checks difficult. One is that arrest records are not public knowledge. Now, part of that reason, and Jim is aware of this, is because Japan wants to rehabilitate criminals. Meaning, if you've served your time or you've had a suspended sentence, then your record is expunged. And in general, if you've been arrested, that is not public knowledge. So you can't check to see if someone has been arrested unless it shows up in the newspaper. And it only usually shows up in the newspaper unless you've stolen a lot of panties or you're a foreigner, in which case the police almost always announce it. The National Police Agency, no offense to the former National Police Agency we have here, is very good about sharing data with registered members of organized crime groups, what they call kosein. I mean, if you're a full-fledged member and you're showing up in the fan magazines, you can check with the NPA and they will tell you. With associate members, they aren't often willing to say whether this person is an associate or not, because sometimes the information is not clear. Those things make doing background checks in Japan very difficult. As an investigative journalist, I've spent like 10 years basically PDFing all Yakuza fan magazines and things, because sometimes, they have a sort of monthly list of people who are arrested, so that's a nice way of getting the names and things. Another problem with background checks here, and Jim knows about this as well because it was always an issue with the FBI and the National Police Agency, is that there's so many people with the same names that unless you know the kanji and the date of birth, you can't identify people. You have to know the kanji. That also makes doing background checks very difficult. So as Jim's talking about, this multi-layered approach is public, personal, going to people's offices, seeing if there are 5 different names for a company on the same wall, things that might indicate that this isn't actually a legitimate enterprise. That makes it difficult and expensive to do. Also, credit checks are very difficult to do as well. There are some places that could do it, some places that can't. So it's, my personal experience where you're looking at a story and you're trying to figure out whether this individual is somebody shady or not, it's very hard to do because a lot of that information isn't out there. Personally, I think the fact that you can't see whether someone's been arrested before or had a conviction easily is a good thing, because it does give people a chance to rehabilitate if they can keep their nose clean. Other questions? If we don't have other questions, we may adjourn early. Okay.
There have been a lot of stories about busts of internet casinos in Japan, illegal internet casinos. It seems that there's a lot of the Yakuza and other crimes right now are related to setting up these little rooms behind steel doors in back rooms of places like Kabukicho and other cities. Can you throw a little light on, as far as what is the, how big is this issue? How big a part of this is it of organized crime today? And, how does it affect the casino industry going forward?
Well, nothing good happens in a back room, I'll tell you that. The Boryokudan, like the LCN of yesteryear, etc., they'll do anything to make money. Whether it's anecdotal or significant, they will try to make money. With the surge in the last 10 years of the internet, social media, technology, etc., they're only limited by their creativity in these types of things. So I haven't worked a case on a phantom type of situation like that. But doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that they're not good at it. And it doesn't surprise me that it could potentially have far-ranging implications when there's a real casino here. It's just one more thing to worry about.
Follow-up question. Do you think that that when casinos are introduced here, that it will eliminate sort of the underground casinos that are, pop up now again in Nagoya and Kabukicho? Will that cut off a revenue stream to the organized crime?
Jake, I don't know. I would be hypothesizing, which I typically don't like to do. I think what is going to be spiked are extortionate loans, loan sharking, potential to move illicit funds, et cetera. Those are tier A issues that potentially could be a problem if the proper governance is not initiated at the early stages. But I don't know to answer your question.
Albert?
Hello, I'm Albert Siegel, freelance. So my question, I guess, is do you think that Japan, I guess, from a legal standpoint, in terms of law and law enforcement and capability, do you think they're prepared for the potential downsides to having these IR casinos in Japan? And if not, what do you think is the most likely, worst case scenarios that can occur rather quickly?
Well, I think I've said this already, but the National Police Agency Japan, Keisatcho, is one of the finest departments I've ever worked with, and I worked intimately with them to include inside their headquarters. They are very thorough, very knowledgeable. Now, we're getting into an area, gaming, where there isn't any sort of historical perspective other than the legal gaming that they have here, legal betting, I should say, racing, etc. This is going to be a new thing. When casinos started in Las Vegas in the 30s and the 40s, the Gaming Control Board, the FBI, law enforcement wasn't prepared, but you learn how to transition, you learn how to educate, and you learn how to handle it, because when you're a good police officer, the predicate violation doesn't matter if it's a robbery or money laundering. You're good at what you do. You get facts, you're thorough, you pay attention to detail, and you have one goal, and that's to determine who the subjects are and pursue them vigorously. That's what every police officer does, whether you're in Japan or the United States. And I can tell you again, the MPA is exceptional. They were exceptional every minute I worked in the FBI with them.
Here's a question. If there are 50 ways to leave your lover, give me 10 ways to rip off a casino if you're organized crime. How could it be done?
Well, if I give you 50 ways to rip off a casino, they're going to miss their lunch.
We'll settle for 10, 5.
The easiest way to conduct some sort of a rip-off, you say, Jake, would be from the inside out, to have somebody who hasn't been vetted properly, to have somebody who's been compromised, to somebody who has a gambling problem that's been compromised, who works inside a casino in the financial departments or other areas that could expose a property. That's the biggest problem. And when you background somebody coming in, they could have no baggage, if you will, but 3 years later, there could be problems. That's why you need maintenance investigations to continue to look at everybody. Again, to answer your question, the best way to do it is from the inside out. Security is going to be tight here. Uniformed, access control, probably facial recognition, which is on the cusp of being very, very good. But it's the internal parts, the controls, the oversight, the layers of compliance that are key, especially in the financial side and the compliance side, that need to be solidified beyond anything that is just a normal, rudimentary type of security situation.
What is a maintenance investigation?
A maintenance investigation is an investigation that we do on an employee who has moved from X position to position of trust and authority. You're handling money. You have access to IT. Prior to that, you were in a food and beverage position. So you're transitioning into a very trusted position. You have to background that person again. You can't background all employees continuously. It would be not cost effective. But you do it situationally to make sure that people who are promoting and transitioning don't have any sort of baggage that weren't reported.
And how do you do that? Do you make them give you their bank statement, or do you go to their house and see if they have a new car? What do you do?
Well, there's a lot of ways to do that, but they know the expectation is when you're promoted, you're going to be given a background check again for your new promoted position, and it never hurts to background somebody who's going into a new position that hasn't had a background for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And very stringent human resources policies and procedures are such that you are required to report arrests or bad behavior. And a lot of people don't do that because they think, no, we're not going to get backgrounded again. Huh? A lot of times that's not the case. So it's a combination of the compliance department, human resources, established policy. This happens all the time in the States.
We can take one more question, and then I'm going to give Jim his award and send him on his way. Anyone?
I wanted to clarify. Sorry, to clarify my question, it wasn't about the capability of the law enforcement. It was regarding written law, statutes and such. Mm-hmm. Is Japan prepared in that sense, as in the police can only work with what they're allowed to work with? Mm-hmm. My question is basically, is Japan prepared to deal with it based on that? And again, what do you see as a possible problem with any limitations that you know of?
Well, in my opinion, Japan will be prepared at the right time to enact proper legislation. They're going to need to have a very robust gaming regulatory department, and those things take time. If you think about in Nevada, where gaming was legalized in 1931, I think the Nevada Gaming Control Board went into effect 25 years later. So these things take time. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, the 30s to now. Things are a lot more quicker on a multitude of fronts. But Japan, in my opinion, will be prepared when the first IR is open. The laws will be enacted, they'll be commensurate and appropriate to the situation, and they're going to have vigorous oversight because that's the Japanese way. Thoroughness, in-depth, and substantive. That's how they operate in this country.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Anybody? Oh, sorry, hold on. Yeah. Go ahead.
Very simple question. You are working now for the consultant company. What is your fee for this one? Very simple. Your fee, your consultant fee for this, for example, as a casino advisor.
I think I would settle for a good Japanese lunch.
Oh, on that note, we're going to break for lunch pretty soon. Jim, thank you very much for coming. This is your honorary membership to the FCCJ for 1 year. You can enjoy our fine dining and delicious beverages here. The booze is cheap, I can say that much. And we hope that you will come back within the next year. And everyone, thank you. Let's give him a round of applause, and thank you for coming in here today.
Thanks.
I'm going to ask you to stay seated while Jim exits here. His business cards are here, and if he'd be happy to talk to you later. And his company information is here if you want to take one.